I still remember the exact sound of my phone ringing that evening. I didn't know it then, but that sound would mark the end of the life I thought I had. I was standing in the kitchen, cutting vegetables, humming quietly while Hamza, my 3-year-old son, played with his toy car on the floor. My husband had left for work in the morning, kissing me on the forehead the way he always did, saying, "Don't wait up too late, Elisa." I smiled at him, never knowing those would be his last words to me. When the phone rang, I thought it was him, maybe telling me he was stuck in traffic. But it wasn't. It was a stranger's voice, trembling, hesitant. He said there had been an accident. My husband was gone. Just like that. No warning, no goodbye. Gone. My knife slipped from my hand, clattering onto the floor, and I remember Hamza looking up at me with those wide, innocent eyes, saying, "Mama?" I fell to the ground, unable to breathe, unable to speak. It felt like my chest had been ripped open. The next hours passed in a blur. Relatives filled the house, neighbors crowded in. People brought food and tears and words that meant nothing. "Be strong, Elisa, you'll be okay. Be okay?" How could I be okay when the man I loved, the father of my child, was lying cold in a hospital bed? The funeral came and went, but my pain stayed. Every night, Hamza would crawl into bed beside me and whisper, "Where is Papa?" And I would lie there, holding him so tight it hurt, unable to answer. At first, people kept their promises. They said they would help, that I wasn't alone. Groceries showed up, relatives checked in, but within weeks, the visits stopped. The food ran out. The bills didn't. One by one, they all disappeared. Their sympathy was temporary, but my grief was not. The small money my husband's company gave me was gone within months. Rent notices piled up. I had never worked outside before, but now I had no choice. I started cleaning houses. My hands that once cooked for my little family now scrubbed strangers' floors. My back ached, my body grew weaker, but Hamza needed food, and that was enough to keep me moving. But poverty wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was the way people began to see me. Not as a grieving young mother, but as a woman alone. As an opportunity, the landlord was the first. He came one evening to collect the rent. When I said I didn't have it all, he leaned in close, too close, his breath hot against my ear. "There are other ways to pay, Elisa," he whispered. My whole body froze. I slammed the door shut, holding Hamza in my arms, shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls that should have protected me felt dangerous, unsafe. It didn't stop there. At the houses where I cleaned, men's eyes followed me. Some brushed their hands against mine and smiled as if my silence was an invitation. One even said, "You must get lonely at night." Lonely. The word burned inside me. They didn't see my loneliness as pain, but as an opening for their desire. Even relatives turned. One man, someone I trusted, began visiting often after my husband's death. At first, he brought groceries. He spoke kindly. I thought maybe he truly cared. But one night, his voice changed. "Elisa, you are still young. You need love. I can make you happy again." My heart stopped. His hand reached for mine. I pulled back, shaking, and told him to leave. He glared at me, his words sharp like knives. "Don't act innocent. Without me, how will you survive?" That night, I locked the door and hugged Hamza as tightly as I could. His little arms wrapped around my neck, his sleepy voice whispering, "Mama, why are you crying?" I had no answer. How could I explain that the world outside, and even the people inside, saw me not as a mother, not as a widow, but as something cheap, something available? I covered myself more. I avoided eye contact. I spoke less. But none of it mattered. One evening, walking home with Hamza, a group of young men followed me down the street, laughing, shouting things I will never repeat. My heart pounded as I gripped Hamza's tiny hand and walked faster. That night, I realized just how unsafe I truly was. Through it all, Hamza stayed by my side. Even as a child, he seemed to sense the danger. He would hold my hand and whisper, "Don't worry, Mama, when I grow up, I'll protect you." His innocence gave me strength, but deep down, I wondered how long I could keep surviving like this. Because in my world, being a widow at 23 didn't just mean losing my husband. It meant losing safety, losing dignity, losing peace. But what I didn't know then was that my son, my little Hamza, would one day become the very reason I survived it all. Every morning began the same. I woke up before sunrise, packed Hamza's small school bag, and left for work with my stomach empty but my heart determined. I worked in 3 different houses. By evening, my hands were raw from scrubbing, my back ached from bending, and my feet felt like they were made of stone. Yet somehow I kept moving because there was no other choice. But no matter how hard I worked, it was never just work. There were always the looks, the comments, the touches disguised as accidents. I began to feel like a prisoner inside my own body, as though being young and widowed had stripped me of the right to simply exist, without suspicion or desire following me everywhere. One afternoon, I was cleaning a large house when the owner, a man in his late 40s, walked into the room where I was mopping. His shoes tapped slowly against the floor as he came closer, his eyes lingering too long. He said in a voice that made my skin crawl, "Elisa, you shouldn't have to do this kind of work. If you were mine, you wouldn't lift a finger." I froze, my knuckles tightening around the mop handle. Then his hand touched my shoulder, soft but heavy with intention. My stomach turned. I stepped back quickly, whispering, "Please respect yourself and me," he smirked. "Respect doesn't feed your son, does it?" I left the house trembling, the mop water still dirty on the floor. When I got home, Hamza noticed the tears I had tried to hide. He didn't ask questions, but that night I heard him whisper into the dark, "One day, Mama, I'll make them all regret it." It broke me and healed me at the same time. My child was only 8, yet the world had already forced him to think like a man. He was too young to carry that weight, but I couldn't take it off his shoulders. I was barely holding myself together. The whispers in the street continued. Neighbors, strangers, even men I passed on my way to work, everyone seemed to think my loneliness was an invitation. The cruelest part was that if I ever spoke out, I knew what people would say. They would blame me. They always blame the woman. She must have encouraged them. She must have wanted it. I carried that silence like a stone in my chest. But Hamza saw me. Not as a woman to be judged, not as a widow to be pitied, but simply as his mother. Sometimes he would slip small pieces of bread into my hands, saying, "Mama, you eat first." Sometimes he would sit by the door until I came home late, just to walk me inside safely. He didn't know how, but he was already protecting me in the only ways he could. Years passed, and Hamza grew. By the time he was 12, there was something in his eyes that startled me. A strength I hadn't taught him, a determination that came from watching me suffer. One evening when I came home exhausted, he met me outside with a firm voice. "Mama, I'll never let anyone hurt you again." "I promise," I smiled through my tears, touched his face and whispered, "You're still a boy. Hamza, you shouldn't have to carry such promises." But inside, I knew he already was carrying them. When I looked back, I realized something. While society was trying to break me piece by piece, it was unknowingly shaping my son into steel. Hamza began to change in small ways. He studied harder than anyone in his class. He stopped playing as much with the other children. He read books late into the night under a dim bulb. When other kids bought snacks, Hamza saved his money. Once, when I told him to spend his allowance on something sweet, he shook his head and weeks later surprised me with a new pair of shoes because mine had holes. I couldn't stop crying that day. My little boy, barely a teenager, was already living as the man of the house, and yet, the world kept testing us. One night, as I walked home after a long day, a group of young men started following me again. They laughed, shouted, called me names I will never forget. My heart raced as I gripped Hamza's hand, walking faster, pretending not to hear. He was only a child, but he noticed every word, every laugh. When we reached home, he sat quietly for a long time, then said in a low voice, "One day, Mama, they'll regret making you cry." Something shifted inside me then. I realized that my suffering wasn't just mine anymore. It was shaping him, burning lessons into his heart that no child should have to learn so early. By the time he entered high school, Hamza had become different from other boys. While others wasted time, he studied. While others laughed, he worked. He began tutoring younger kids after school, earning small amounts of money. He would press the bills into my hand and say with a smile, "Mama, buy something for yourself." He never kept anything for himself. He even learned to cook simple meals, so that when I came home too exhausted, there would be food waiting. Sometimes he would mend his own clothes so I didn't have to. Every little action was his way of protecting me, of lifting me, of giving me dignity back. And still, despite everything, the shadows of the past kept creeping in. Men still whispered, still stared, still tried to find cracks in my silence. But I noticed something new. Hamza was no longer just a boy standing beside me. He was becoming my shield. and deep down I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Because maybe, just maybe, the world had tried to break the wrong woman. By the time Hamza turned 15, I could see how much he had changed. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was becoming the protector I never asked for, but desperately needed. His shoulders had grown broader, his voice had deepened, and there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. He had learned to carry himself in a way that made people hesitate before crossing him. I remember one afternoon when we were at the market buying vegetables. A man standing near the stall made a comment under his breath, one of those disgusting things men think they can say to a woman who's alone. My instinct was to ignore it, like I always had. But before I could move, Hamza turned to him, his face sharp with anger. "Respect my mother," he said, his voice steady and strong. The man laughed at first, but something in Hamza's stare shut him up. For the first time, I realized my little boy had grown into someone who could silence even grown men. That night, I cried quietly when Hamza was asleep. Not out of weakness, but out of pride. My son was carrying a burden no child should have, yet he did it with honor. His teachers at school began noticing his discipline, his determination. One teacher in particular, Mr. Farhan, took a special interest in him. He told Hamza, "You're not just bright, you're different. You can change lives, starting with your mother's." Hamza came home glowing that day, his words echoing in my ears. Change lives. My son believed it. He started tutoring even more kids, working late evenings to earn a little extra. Sometimes I would wake up at night and see the light still on in his room, his head bent over books. When I told him to rest, he would smile and say, "Mama, every page I read is for you." One winter, our old stove broke down. I had no idea how we would cook. Without telling me, Hamza used the money he had saved from tutoring to buy us a new one. He carried it all the way home himself, his face flushed with pride. "Now you won't have to worry, Mama," he said. But life didn't stop testing us. There was a man whose house I worked in, wealthy, arrogant, used to getting what he wanted. One afternoon, as I was scrubbing the floor, he came and stood behind me. His presence was suffocating. He bent down, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Elisa, you work too hard. If you let me take care of you, you wouldn't have to suffer like this." His hand brushed against my back, and I froze. I spun around, my voice shaking but firm. "Please respect me," he smirked, leaning closer. "Respect doesn't put food on your table." I left immediately, my hands trembling so badly I could barely carry my bag. When I got home, Hamza was waiting. He saw my face, my red eyes, and though I tried to hide it, he knew. He didn't ask questions, but that night I overheard him muttering in the dark, "I'll make sure no man ever dares to touch her again." It scared me and comforted me at the same time. My son's heart was soft for me, but turning to steel against the world. At 16, something extraordinary happened. Hamza won a scholarship to study abroad. The day the letter arrived, my hands trembled as I opened it. The words blurred through my tears. Full scholarship, opportunity of a lifetime. I looked at him, my chest tight, and whispered, "This is your future, Hamza." He smiled, his eyes shining. "No, Mama, this is our future." The night before his flight, I couldn't sleep. I sat beside him while he packed, my heart torn between pride and fear. I kept remembering all the nights we had gone hungry, all the insults, all the hands that had tried to touch me. I thought of how this boy had grown into the man his father couldn't live long enough to be. At the airport, when he hugged me, his voice broke. "Mama, you've been both mother and father to me. You never gave up. Now let me fight for you." I held him so tight, my tears soaking his shoulder. When he walked away toward the gates, I felt both empty and full at the same time. That night, as I sat alone in our tiny house, I realized that my son was leaving not just to chase his own dreams, but to rewrite the story of our lives. The house felt unbearably quiet after Hamza left. For years, his presence had filled every corner, every silence, every heavy moment with hope. Now, without him, I felt like a part of me was missing. I would wake up expecting to hear his footsteps, his voice asking, "Mama, do you need help?" But all I heard was the echo of my own breathing. And yet, even across oceans, Hamza found ways to make me feel less alone. Within his first month abroad, he called me, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Mama, I found a part-time job. I'll send you money every month." I wanted to tell him not to, that he needed every dollar for himself. But before I could protest, he cut me off. No, Mama, you've sacrificed everything for me. Now it's my turn. And true to his word, the money came. Not much at first, but enough to fill the kitchen with food, enough to pay rent without begging. For the first time in years, I could walk into a grocery store and buy what I wanted instead of only what I could afford. I could cook meals without calculating each grain of rice. The weight that had pressed down on my shoulders for so long finally began to lift. Months turned into years, and Hamza grew stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. His calls became my lifeline. Sometimes he would tell me about his classes, about how hard he was studying. Other times he would talk about the small jobs he took, waiting tables, delivering newspapers, anything that brought money. He laughed often, but beneath his laughter, I could hear the determination in his voice. One night, he said something that made me cry for hours after hanging up. Mama, I don't just want to make you comfortable. I want to give you back the dignity people tried to steal from you. It was in that moment I realized my son wasn't just chasing success. He was fighting for me, for the life I deserved but had been denied. Slowly, the house changed. The peeling paint on the walls was redone. Old furniture was replaced. I bought new curtains, a new stove, even a proper bed to replace the thin mattress I had slept on for years. Each small change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. But the true change wasn't in the walls or the furniture. It was in me. For the first time since my husband's death, I could breathe without fear suffocating me. I no longer jumped when the landlord knocked. I no longer walked the streets with my head down. I began to carry myself differently because I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Even if he was far away, Hamza's strength was with me. Then came the day that changed everything. Hamza called, his voice shaking with excitement. Mama, I graduated. With honors. I couldn't stop crying. I pressed the phone to my chest, whispering, "Thank you, God. Thank you for giving me this son." He didn't stop there. Weeks later, he sent me a picture of a contract, a job offer, a real career. Mama, he said, this is the beginning. Your struggle ends here. The first time he came home after graduation, I almost didn't recognize him. The little boy who once held my hand tightly on the streets was now a tall, confident young man. His shoulders were strong, his eyes steady, his smile proud. When he walked into our house, relatives who had ignored us for years suddenly reappeared. They came with wide smiles and fake congratulations, pretending they had always been supportive. I saw through their masks, but Hamza didn't care about them. He only cared about me. He hugged me tightly and whispered, "Mama, we made it. Your tears are finished." That night, I sat alone for a while, reflecting on everything we had been through. The nights I had cried into my pillow, the times men had looked at me like I was nothing, the countless moments when I thought I couldn't go on. And now here was my son, my little boy who once saved his allowance to buy me shoes, standing as a man who had rebuilt our world. It wasn't just about money or comfort. It was about dignity, respect. The kind of respect people tried to strip from me when I was most vulnerable. Hamza had given it back. And for the first time in years, I believed that maybe my story wasn't one of loss after all. Maybe it was a story of survival, of love, of triumph. The day Hamza officially started his career, I lit a candle in front of my husband's picture. I whispered softly, "He became the man you wanted him to be." My heart ached, wishing his father could see what our son had become. But deep down, I knew he was watching. Life began to look different. For the first time in years, I wasn't counting coins in the market. I wasn't waking up with dread about rent. I wasn't hiding behind silence when people looked at me with judgment. Instead, I walked with my head high. My son had given me that. But what touched me most wasn't the financial change. It was Hamza's soul. Despite all his success, he never forgot who he was or where he came from. He sent me money regularly, but he never spoke about it as charity. He would always say, "Mama, this is yours. I'm just returning what you gave me." Sometimes I caught myself remembering the nights when I sat by the door, crying silently while holding him in my lap. Back then, I had no strength left. I thought life was over. But somehow the same little boy who used to whisper, "Mama, I'll protect you," had kept his promise. There was one moment I'll never forget. A distant relative, one who had once mocked me, who had once whispered cruel things behind my back, came to our house after hearing of Hamza's success. He smiled at me and said, "Elisa, you're so lucky. Look at your son." I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steady, and said, "Luck had nothing to do with it. It was love. It was sacrifice. It was God's mercy. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to speak. Hamza overheard and later hugged me tightly. Mama, you don't know how proud I am of you. Those words meant more than any comfort, more than any money. Because in his eyes, I wasn't just a widow. I wasn't just a mother who survived. I was a fighter. Years passed and Hamza continued to grow, not just in career, but in heart. He became the kind of man who respected women, who helped those in need, who never let pride erase his humility. He often said, Mama, everything I do is because I saw what you endured. I'll never let another woman suffer the way you did. Hearing those words, I realized something powerful. Society had tried to break me with poverty, with shame, with harassment, with loneliness. But instead, it forged my son into steel. Every insult, every cruel stare, every night of hunger had turned into fuel for him. He carried my pain, but he turned it into strength. One evening, as we sat together in our now warm, safe home, Hamza held my hand and said, Do you know, Mama, you are my hero? People think I succeeded because of my own hard work, but the truth is I learned everything from you. Your strength built me. Your love made me. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. For the first time in years, they were tears of joy. My son had become my protector, my pride, my redemption, and that's when I finally understood. I hadn't just survived. I had won. Widows are not weak. They are not objects. They are women who carry storms inside them and still manage to keep moving forward. And sometimes their greatest strength is the children they raise with love and sacrifice. My story is not just about loss. It's about resilience. It's about how love, pure, selfless love, can rebuild a life that was once shattered. Hamza gave me back my dignity. But more than that, he gave me hope. He showed me that no matter how dark the world becomes, light can always rise from it. And today, as I sit here sharing my story, I want every widow, every mother, every woman who feels invisible to know, you are not weak. You are not forgotten. You are stronger than you think. Because if a boy who once held his mother's hand in fear can grow into a man who lifted her into light, then anything is possible. My name is Elisa. I was broken once. But with my son's love, I found a way to rise again.